it does reinforce Trump's obsession with having ownership of territory rather than leasing it, and that perhaps explains something about the whole Greenland issue. But I think if Trump is determined to do it, I don't think there's much Starmer can do to say you may not use the airfields in Britain.
And of course, there's a very important international story developing this week about the Chagos Islands, and more specifically the base Diego Garcia. Keir Starmer, according to the Times today, has apparently blocked a request from Donald Trump to allow American planes to use British airbases to attack Iran. The British Prime Minister claims that allowing such operations to take place would breach international law. The Times understands the disagreement is one of the reasons why Trump withdrew his support for the Chagos Islands deal this week. This is a confusing story for me, Michael Binyon. Is Keir Starmer really going to stand up to Donald Trump on a mission to effectively carry out regime change in Iran?
Well, it is a very confusing story, particularly on the Chagos, as Trump has changed his mind 3 times within the space of 2 months. On the use of British airfields, well, this issue came up very dramatically during Reagan's presidency, when it turned out he had used the bases, American bases in Britain, to take off, for his planes to take off to bomb Libya. There was a raid on Libya. In fact, I think one of Gaddafi's daughters was killed in that raid, and there was a huge row. And it turned out the Americans just assumed they had the right to use the airfields. And Britain said, well, actually, they're on our territory and you need permission. Now, if Keir Starmer is trying to block the use of British airfields, or airfields in Britain, rather, for anything to do with Iran, I think that is going to be very, very tricky. It would infuriate Trump. It would actually possibly lead to him simply saying, I'll do it anyway. It does reinforce Trump's obsession with having ownership of territory rather than leasing it, and that perhaps explains something about the whole Greenland issue. But I think if Trump is determined to do it, I don't think there's much Starmer can do to say you may not use the airfields in Britain.
That's 2 excellent points there, Michael. I mean, Alice, I think the reason I find the story confusing is precisely because of Michael's point. Well, Trump would do it anyway. He barely observes the laws in his own country. The idea that an RAF officer would lie down in front of a B-52 bomber strikes me as ludicrous. But it also, weirdly, is a dangerous tactic for Keir Starmer, because it would reinforce, as Michael says, this point that actually we must have Greenland, because what if the Greenlanders refuse us in 10 years' time?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what I can add to what Michael and you have said, because I find this story quite confusing. I mean, I think for me it goes back to, I don't understand why we're giving away the Chagos Islands in the first place. It seems mental.
That's a technical term.
Well, sorry, it seems just absolutely crazy that we're giving away this very important military base, paying Mauritius to take it when it has nothing to do with Mauritius. These people are, the people of Chagos all live in Gloucester or somewhere. They all live in Britain. They don't want to be Mauritian. Crawley.
Yes.
They don't want to be Mauritian. It's because some international court that Keir Starmer is obsessed with said we have to.
It was only an advisory from the International Court of Justice, and it just suggested that this was still colonialism. And it was this. You see, Trump's final statement, which basically put the kibosh on the whole deal, was that this was wokeism gone mad. And to some extent, he's right. It was because Britain wanted to be seen to be on the right side, as for developing nations, so that we're not going to occupy territory and all that. I mean, the byproduct of this whole row is that Trump has made the right decision on the Chagos Islands, possibly for the wrong reason, but he's made the right decision. And I think it's going to be very hard for this legislation to go through now. It's the Lords have played a good role in blocking it or holding it up to try to amend it. There's no amendment possible. It simply should be scrapped. As Alice says, the whole deal is idiotic. 35 billion to the government of Mauritius for for 99 years. And, it would allow in Chinese spy ships to fish, so-called, around the waters where American communications are vital.
I would stick up to Keir Starmer to the extent that I do think upholding international law is a really important principle, but I don't see why we're not challenging it. Why we're not challenging the legal decision here? Why we're just bowing down and handing
Well, it's not
over
really
this
a decision.
territory.
I mean, the International Court of Justice, it was simply an advisory that, you need to do a deal.
The whole thing was initiated by the Biden administration, who said, in the light of this advisory, we have to sort of clarify everything. So we need to do a deal, partly to secure Diego Garcia, but with this uncertainty, grey area about ownership, we need to kind of resolve the issue. And that's where the whole saga started. But I think you're both right that the politics have moved very far away from that. But let's go back to domestic politics. The former Reform MP Rupert Lowe has launched a new political party. It's called Restore Britain. It's been backed by a number of figures to the right of reform, if you can believe that there are such figures, including the Advance UK Party, which counts Tommy Robinson among its supporters. It's got the backing of Elon Musk, always a good sign. Join Rupert Lowe in Restore Britain because he is the only one who will actually do it, he says. Alys, do you think there is room for Restore Britain? Do you think it's going to have a big impact on the reform vote?
I've never heard of Rupert Lowe. I don't know what Restore Britain is. Nobody does except a few very right-wing young men on Twitter and apparently Elon Musk. It's a very obscure far-right party. Look, our politics is very fractured at the moment, so it's possible that in a future election they take some votes off reform and split a far-right vote. But yeah, I mean, nobody knows who this guy is.
Well, I beg to differ with you, Alys Denby. I mean, he's quite prominent. He was quite.
He's not.
I'm just
Ed.
looking at his Twitter following, 657,000.
Yeah, that's Twitter, isn't it?
Twitter followers.
I think there was a poll of the general public that found something like only 8% of people had even heard of him.
Yes. Well, I mean, he's famous for his great row with Farage. I mean, the trouble is that these far-right groups, they split and split and split endlessly. They're very ideological warriors. They're very determined that their version of the truth should prevail, and they each try to outbid each other for being more right-wing, more nationalistic, often more racist than each other. And I think it's just a ragbag collection of people who, they do have followers, they do appeal, but they cancel each other out in the end.
Absolutely. But I mean, and their politics are pretty unedifying. I mean, they are talking about mass deportation, but there are people who talk about, I think there are 46 seats where the majority is less than 2% of the vote. If, it's 3 years till the election, if Rupert Lowe, who's a wealthy man, he doesn't take his MP's salary, for example, he donates it to charity, really does keep pushing this, it could have an impact on the reform vote. I mean, Alys, are you right to dismiss it so glibly?
I don't know. Look, nobody can predict what will happen at the next election. But I think mostly when people go into the ballot box, they're not really thinking about their local MP. They're thinking about who they want to be Prime Minister. And I think in that sense, it's going to be a contest between whoever's in charge of Labour, Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage, and maybe Zach Polanski.
OK. Peter from Bedfordshire says Nigel Farage is basically a Hampstead Liberal. Rupert Lowe is very well known, highly respected. Good luck to him. We finally have a choice beyond the uni party. But it is fascinating, these right-wing parties splitting. Now, let's go and talk. We're going to have a huge real estate section of the podcast now. We're going to start at the Palace of Westminster and we're going to end up at Margaret Thatcher House. All will become clear. We've talked about the restoration and renewal of Parliament. We had Jacob Rees-Mogg on the show a couple of weeks ago saying that the price tag of gazillions was completely out of line, and that has actually managed to stir the interest of Alys Denby. She couldn't give a fig about Rupert Lowe, but boy does she care about the renovation of the Palace of Westminster. She's even written a column about it. What have you said, Alys?
Well, look, I'm just quite frustrated that the Conservatives have said that the current plans for the restoration and renewal must be paused, and I think they make a lot of good points. Look, there's a lot of scope creep in the current plans, which are going to cost 40 billion and take 60 years, and do things like make a Victorian palace net zero, and every single back corridor must be wheelchair accessible. And everyone who's ever been there knows that it's actually a very wheelchair accessible building as it is. So look, I think they're right to criticise the current plans, But I'm very frustrated with the delay. This whole thing started back in 2012, was when both houses agreed that repairs were urgently necessary. Let's be clear, it's not just because it's an old building, it's because it's a fire risk and thousands of people work there. Someone could die. So that was 2012, and it's been years and years and years, and like something like 31 different bits of legislation and independent reports and scoping documents. I just wish that you, Ed, and the rest of members of both houses of Parliament would get it together and fix it, because it's such a beautiful, iconic, essential part of our national heritage. Fix it.
I agree. I mean, it is ridiculous that but the thing is, they can't decide what to do, whether to have it being fixed all around them, which would take forever, or whether they should decamp, move somewhere else. This same thing happened in Germany when I was correspondent in Bonn. Ironically, it was just before German reunification, where they decided that Bonn was going to be the capital of West Germany forevermore, and that they really ought to have a proper Bundeshaus in which to meet. So they moved out of the very makeshift Bundeshaus that they had into temporary accommodation. They renovated the whole of Parliament, and then a few months later, Germany was unified, and they moved to Berlin. But they did decide to move out, and they moved to, I think, a waterworks, and met there for about 6 months, and they did it pretty quickly. And if Parliament moves out, I mean, somewhere local, I mean, they could just have a big tent. I think a reader of the Times letters suggested pitching a great tent in the middle of Parliament Square, and they could all work in the circus there, which they do anyway. But they need to move out and get on with it.
I think it's also I think it's such a kind of metaphor for the state of our politics generally, that no wonder we can't build high-speed rail. No wonder we can't build all the houses we need. No wonder we can't do anything when MPs can't even get it together to fix the literal roof above their heads.
Well, the great irony is they have, because Jacob Rees-Mogg made the point that we spent £100 million fixing the roof, and I'm pretty persuaded, having thought my elders and betters would know what they were doing, that this plan for the restoration and renewal of the Palace of Westminster is a real bells and whistles proposal. The trouble is, if you're just a minister and a layman trying to work your way through the thicket of an incredibly complex construction project and work out what can be done and what could be dropped, is extremely hard. And we also know the great difficulty of procurement, and which is why there may be such a delay now, is that, just as with defence procurement, when a committee tries to kind of organise something and say, this is, let's change this ship here, suddenly the costs go up. I mean, maybe the simplest thing is just commit in principle that we will move out. Lots of MPs don't want to move out because, frankly, they want their day in Parliament. They want to speak in that historic chamber. But, frankly, the Nazis made them move out by bombing the chamber. And secondly, give them a budget and just say, this is it. Here's £5 billion. Do what you can.
Yes.
Start at that end of the debate rather than at the beginning.
Yeah, I just think it's.
But where will they go? Maybe they should go to Margaret Thatcher House, but it's currently occupied by the local MP. He's called Andrew Rossendale. He was a Conservative, but he defected to Reform earlier this year, and now there's a brilliant argy-bargy going on because technically the building is held in trust for Conservatives and their members. They are seeking clarification from Mr. Rossendale for the legal basis on which he continues to occupy it. Some people say that if you defect, you should have a by-election. At the very least, Alice, you should have the grace to leave a house that's owned by the political party you've just left.
Yes, he has no business being in Margaret Thatcher's house, having defected from the Conservative Party.
No, it's not Margaret Thatcher's house. It's Margaret Thatcher House. That's the name of it.
But no, he has, there's no business being there. And Reform have, I think, strayed as far from Margaret Thatcher's legacy as they could possibly go. They're not a free market, reforming party. They're a sort of populist, not even renationalise industries nonsense party.
Well, I also think it's a question of are buildings belonging to local party headquarters occupied by the member for the Parliament as a right, or is that simply that is where they can work, but the party owns the building? I mean, there's no reason for a member of Parliament to say, I work here and I am the MP, therefore I own the building. He doesn't, or she doesn't. It's where they happen to work. If they leave the party, then they should leave the building.
Well, my MP defected. When I was the Tory candidate for Wantage, I worked very closely with the local Conservative MP for 3 years. And after 3 years of working with me, he defected to the Labour Party.
What did he do?
But he immediately left the headquarters of
Very
Wantage
principled.
Conservative
Did he have a
Association.
by-election?
He never worked there again. He defected about 3 months before the general election. But it was like a divorce, because one Friday I was sitting, on his knee as an apprentice in the surgery, and the next week the Labour candidate was doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah,
it was like watching your ex kind of parade around with their new
This sounds like a sort of
partner. It was very
Epstein
traumatic.
files.
It was very traumatic.
Yes. Well, of course, it's increased by calling the Conservative Party headquarters Margaret Thatcher House.
Yes, do you think there could be a great comedy sketch here? Because the Tories could sneak up and change the locks, and then Andrew Rossendale could change it to Nigel Farage.
Yeah, they'd change the name. Yes, and is it the same house? I mean, it's all symbolic. It's symbolic, and it's silly. And of course, in a court of law, Rossendale wouldn't have a hope. He'd lose straight away.
Now, let's talk about misogyny in politics. Keir Starmer has admitted that there have been misogynistic briefings coming out of Number 10. It comes after concerns were raised by female cabinet ministers and MPs, including the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy. The Prime Minister said the issue was shocking and that it was his responsibility to tackle it. There's a lot to unpack here. Of course, people accused Keir Starmer of running a boys' club before the departure of people like Morgan McSweeney. But yet again, it's Keir Starmer pretending he doesn't know anything about what's going on in his own office. I mean, he's responsible for Number 10, isn't he, Alice?
Yeah, sorry, I have very little patience with anything Labour has to say about misogyny. Get yourself a female leader, get yourself a female chancellor who's not completely terrible, and then come back and tell me about misogyny.
Well, they've got a head of the cabinet office now who was promoted in the face of some misogynistic remarks.
She's a civil servant. She's not part of the Labour Party.
Well, civil servant's probably the more important job. I mean, that's the one that runs the government.
No, Eddie, I kind of think that this whole boys' club briefing is actually just kind of factional fight from more left-wing members of Labour. The point is that Morgan McSweeney undertook an extremely aggressive takeover of the Labour Party from what he regarded as the sort of Corbynite faction, which he described, and in fact described Lisa Nandy's kind of ideology as being based on no gender, no borders, no queen. And he cast out that faction, disgruntled about it, and they're coming back and calling it a boys' club.
I mean, Alice, I hear what you say, but I also hear what Madeleine Albright said, which says there's a special place in hell for women who don't support women. I mean, come on. You're a woman.
Well, I just don't
You've got to call this out.
I don't think the way to support women is to have all women shortlists and...
Really? I'm so in favour of them. I'm so...
Well, the danger of that is it becomes tokenistic. And then it becomes...
tokenistic.
Yeah.
Sorry, if Labour were a party that supported women, then they'd have had a female leader by now. The Tories have had 3.
The best person should win, not the best gender. I mean, the best person is...
Quite. And
that's always an excuse for not moving the dial.
Well, it is an excuse. But I think that times are changing and things have changed.
You do. You need to make proper interventions to bring about change.
You don't need to lower standards. Women are
Why
not
is it lowering standards to level the playing field so that more women get elected to Parliament?
I think Rachel Reeves is the lowest standard of Chancellor we've ever seen.
Oh, Nadeem Zahawi will be interested to hear that. We've got the first female cabinet secretary, Alice, Antonia Romeo. What did you say about her on Twitter?
What did I say about her on Twitter?
You said she looks chic as...
Yeah, I think she's chic.
That was Alice's political comment.
How she looks. Oh, dear.
Cabinet secretary.
You've fallen into it.
Superficial.
How do they look?
I didn't know you were so interested in my tweets, Ed Vaizey. Look, I'm a bit torn about Antonia Romeo because I obviously don't... Look, I hope that she's gone through a proper vetting procedure because there are these bullying allegations and it would be a disaster if once again vetting wasn't properly done on such a senior appointment. But I also do think, as I've said before on the show, that she seems quite fab and chic and
she's decisive, dynamic.
Decisive.
Yeah, that's what one needs.
And yeah, I think this is what the government needs.
That's
and
what
I think
they
so.
need.
She's been working hand in hand with Shabana Mahmood, who I think is the only effective person in the current government. So I hope that she continues to do good work. And if these bullying allegations can be stood up, then that's bad, and that's a massive failure of vetting.
We've had such a good chat I've really enjoyed it. And obviously it means that I haven't kept time. We don't have time for UFOs. We don't have Jacob Rees-Mogg's tour. We don't have the Starmer intern who's got his internship by getting lots of TikTok likes. And it's partly because this is the poshest show on radio. So we naturally had a 10-minute discussion about city livery companies. But as usual, Alys Denby and Michael Binyon, you have been absolutely brilliant. Even if, Alice, you have enraged the Times Radio listeners who have huge support for Rupert Lowe. This is Ed Vaizey on Times Radio.